I remember learning early in my life that hope is a risky business. I remember learning that if you have low expectations, if you don't hope, then you lower your chances of disappointment. Life so often teaches us, don't get your hopes up. I've said it before and I will say it again. And by God's grace, I'll say it till my final breath. The gospel calls us to risk hope. Throughout all the sacred writings that give witness to God, creator of the world, Father of Jesus Christ, we are called to risk hope. That was the theme of our annual conference this year. It's been the theme of a teaching series here at Indian Creek for these past few weeks. We began going back to the beginning and asking the question, does God risk hope? We followed that up by looking at the problem of pain, looking at the life of Job, and considering what it looks like to risk hope in the midst of deep suffering. Last Sunday, our focus moved to a particular time in biblical history, a time of great hopelessness among God's people surrounding what we refer to as the Babylonian captivity. Nebuchadnezzar had invaded the southern kingdom of Judah, had besieged Jerusalem, had looted and destroyed the temple, had carried away the best of the young Judean men to Babylon. In that context, God called the prophet Jeremiah to demonstrate the hope that he had, not that everything would just get better, but the hope that he had in the God who created him, the God who called him, the God who wrote the end of the story. And to do a very strange thing, a very foolish sounding thing, to buy a piece of land that the Babylonian army was at that moment camped on outside the city, as a testimony of his hope in the God who had called them, the God who could be trusted to do what he said. This morning and next week, we'll continue to examine stories of risking hope in this general context of the Babylonian captivity and beyond, but with a subtle yet significant shift. See, we've been focusing on hope in the midst of suffering, in the midst of hopelessness, in the midst of circumstances totally beyond our control. But today and next week, I want us to focus more on our spiritual and moral character in the midst of those circumstances. I want to share with you a powerful story. I've shared it before. I share it when I have the privilege of going through pre-marriage counseling with couples, young and old, prior to a wedding. This is in a chapter that talks about, have you developed the habit of happiness? But I want to share it this morning, focusing more on who do I want to be in the midst of circumstances beyond my control. I may not be able to control what happens to me, but I have some control over who I am. I have control over my attitude, my response. Listen, for the first time or again, to a brief summary of the testimony, the story of Viktor Frankl, 26-year-old Jewish psychiatrist in Vienna, Austria, who was arrested by Hitler's Gestapo and placed in a concentration camp. Month in and month out, he worked under the great smokestacks that belched out black carbon monoxide from the incinerators, where his father, mother, sister, and wife had been cremated. Each day, he hoped for a few slivers of carrots or peas in the daily bowl of soup. In cold weather, he got up an hour earlier than usual to wrap his feet and legs in scrap burlap and wire to shield them against the crippling cold of an Eastern European winter. When Viktor Frankl was finally called for inquisition, he stood naked in the center of a powerful white light, while men in shiny boots strode to and fro in the darkened shadows beyond the light. For hours they assailed him with questions and accusations, trying to break him down with every accusing lie they could think of. Already they had taken his wife, his family, his writing, his clothes, his wedding ring, and everything else of material value. But in the midst of this barrage of questions, an idea flashed across Frankl's mind. They have taken from me everything I have, except the power to choose my own attitude, my own response. When we are talking about risking hope, we're talking about what I am calling biblical hope or Christian hope. This is not simply wishful thinking about our circumstances, about some change that we long to happen in our lives externally. No, we're talking about a solid confidence in the person and promises of God expressed most clearly and compellingly in Jesus Christ. Confidence that says, I can trust him no matter what. Period. End of discussion. Part of what we're talking about is finding that solid footing beneath us when it feels like we may be falling. We have this old Dodge van that we got with a lift installed to be able to transport Dad when we need to. And those old vans, they sit kind of high, and so it's always a challenge to get Mom in to the passenger seat when we're going to an appointment together or coming to church. It's kind of just as hard to get her out because that seat is a little high, and every time I'm watching there as I'm in front of her trying to make sure she doesn't fall, I'm watching her there feeling with her foot, feeling first for that little step, and then after that feeling for the ground lest she fall. An image of how important it is to have confidence that there is something there. There's something solid beneath us. That we're not just going to go hurtling through space with this next step. Reminded of a story Jesus told about wise and foolish builders. We teach our children the little song, the wise man built his house upon the rock. But that's not the only part of the story. I don't just mean about the foolish man who built on the sand. I'm talking about why this was so important. It was important because when the rains come, when the storms come, not if, there's something solid. And when that happened, the rains came and beat upon this house. It did not fall because there was something solid beneath it. And that's what we long for. And that's what I long for you to have when we talk about risking hope. Is something solid beneath us to know that I can trust God no matter what. But the question today, and the question really that's the bigger question on my heart, and I'm not saying it will always be there. I feel this message. I feel what we've been sharing very deeply and very passionately. In my mind, in my heart at this moment, and I haven't suffered a lot in life. I need to give that disclaimer. At this moment, I feel very strongly that God offers to us, not just what God wants from us, what God wants for us. I feel very strongly that I can and will trust God no matter what. The bigger question is to turn that around. The bigger question is Can God trust me? Can I trust myself? It's not whether God will be faithful. Will I be faithful in the midst of whatever circumstances I might face? Will I be faithful in holding on to that hope? Will I be faithful in living out that hope? Will I be faithful in my own character and conduct to reflect that faith and trust in Him? I shared this a few weeks ago while Dad was in the hospital. One of the many times when he would say, just pray for me, pray for me. And I knew a lot of that was pray for this difficult time I'm going through, pray for me to gain my strength back. But he also would add, pray that I'll be faithful. That's what we're talking about this morning. Can I maintain my faith, my character, my testimony in the midst of suffering, in the midst of circumstances that may seem hopeless? Once again, the importance of finding our footing comes into play. And that's the challenge that each one of us must embrace. I don't know how much you've been tested in your life in terms of your faithfulness to Christ. But where's that solid place beneath us? Do you have that foundation for you where you know that if you're ever tested in this way, and we can't know till it happens, we can certainly build by practicing, we can build confidence so that Columbine High School, Littleton, Colorado, so that when Rachel is confronted by an aggressor and asked if she believes in God, this doesn't just come out of nowhere that she says, yes, I do. The last thing she says before she's shot and killed. Where do you get the strength, the courage to be faithful in those big times in life? Where do you find that footing to hold you up? That hope to be able to say that hope to be able to maintain our testimony, our witness, our character. Ultimately, even that question comes back to our hope in God. But there are some small things we can do too every day. And so I want to take just a few moments and look at the stories of 4 young men. You know their stories. You recognize their names. Belteshazzar, right? You know him. Somebody chuckled. You don't? Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah. Household names, Sunday school, don't you remember? All right, yeah, some of you do. I'm messing with the rest of you. It wasn't even fair. I didn't even only use their Hebrew names or only use their Babylonian names. 4 young men, we know them because of their circumstance. They were among the young men taken as captives into Babylon. Belteshazzar was the Babylonian name for the young man whose book, Daniel, tells these stories. The other 3 names I gave you were their Hebrew names. Those are the names we should remember. I don't know why we've given in to the Babylonian renaming, and we call them Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You know their stories. They're heroes. Why? Because they stayed true. They were faithful. In the midst of seeming hopeless contexts, would they ever see home again? They were living in a hostile environment, hostile to their faith in the true God. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, their story comes first, but I'd like to tell that second. Daniel's story comes when Daniel was successful. Daniel was being promoted. Why? Because of his character. We had a fabulous lesson about that in our Sunday school class this morning. And again, if you're not connected with our Right Now media, talk to me, sign up. powerful series we're going through called Thriving in Babylon. This morning talked about Daniel as a captive there, how he was promoted because his character, because the integrity with which he lived, because of the respect he showed even to his enemies, even to the king who had invaded his homeland and carried him away captive. But there were other Babylonians who were so envious of Daniel, determined to find some way to bring him down. They could not find fault with his character, so they turned to his faith. They came in, and in this underhanded way, they persuaded, at this time it was King Darius, so you know some time has passed. Not Nebuchadnezzar, who had initially invaded, but persuaded King Darius. Flattery, say will get you nowhere. Well, sometimes it really works. And they flattered the king and said, "Oh, Darius, there should be a law in the nation that nobody should be able to pray to anyone else except to you. You're like a god, oh Darius." "Oh, you think so? All right, yeah. Go right ahead. Oh, and anyone who prays to any other god besides you should be cast into the den of lions." "Oh, that sounds good. Sounds like a fair punishment." Let me read one verse out of Daniel 6. "Now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published," what decree? Pray to no one but the king. "When Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room, where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before." Where do you get the strength, the courage, the faith, the faithfulness in a moment like that? To know the consequences, but to continue being faithful, continue not just hiding in a closet, continue to go to the window that opened toward Jerusalem and to pray 3 times a day just as he'd done before. Well, it came because of those last 5 words, just as he had done before. See, he had a habit. Character doesn't come in the midst of this great crisis. Character comes from the choices we make every day to seek God, to put him first. And when the real test came, he knew what he had to do. Now, yes, we know God delivered him in a miraculous way. And sometimes God does. Back up a couple chapters. You heard me talk about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I talk about them all the time, and I'm going to keep talking about them. Because where they were in their crisis, in their test, is where I want to be and where I want you to be. Not to please me, but because I love you and because that's peace. That's hope. I want that for you. Their story's very similar. People envious of them and their faithfulness. Actually, their promotions in the land of Babylon, these foreigners. Another king, Nebuchadnezzar, another edict, bowing down to this golden image that had been created of him. Somebody ratted him out. "Hey, there's these 3 guys in your administration. They've not bowed down," and he brings them in. And a testimony to the character of these young men. Same with Daniel. The king was beside himself when Daniel was brought before him and had to be thrown into the den of lions. King Darius, he was scrambling. Is there any way to get out of this? And no, he could not reverse his law to save that life. And I don't know how all that worked, because afterwards he did, but he didn't sleep all night. He was worried about Daniel, this God-fearing slave from Judea. At daybreak he comes, and Daniel, are you okay? Has your God delivered you? Similar thing here with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They're brought before the king, and he begs with them, all you have to do is bow down. Please reconsider. And you know what they said. They said, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king." You know, that's pretty confident, isn't it? It is. But there's a subtle difference here. This is not confident in the outcome. It's confidence that God can bring about that desired outcome. But the next verse is the one that speaks so powerfully to me, and I've said it over and over again. We know that God is able to do this. Verse 18, but even if he does not. That's our hope. Even if he does not, even if in God's wisdom, even if God's plan and purpose, which is so far beyond my ability to comprehend, even if I can make absolute zero sense in what is happening in my life, even if he does not. O king, you need to know, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold that you have set up. It is possible to be faithful in the midst of a context that goes against everything we believe. But it doesn't happen overnight. Character is formed when the stakes are not quite so high. They're formed in the choices we make every day. You know, the very first chapter in Daniel, when these young men first arrived in Babylon, it came right down to their diet. They were offered all of this meat and wine, and you say, oh, that sounds good. The king's choicest foods, because he saw that they were the best and brightest, and he wanted them to fill important positions in his kingdom, and obviously you had to eat the best food, so they were getting all this luxury food that nobody else in the kingdom was eating. They said, no. Our faith, our tradition teaches us to eat in other healthy ways. And I'm not going to get into all the details of this, but it was basically vegetables. And here they were faced with this decision. You say, well, does it really matter? Does God really care that much about what I eat? And I'm going to suggest that that's not really the most important thing here. The most important thing is these young men, their hearts were bent towards obeying God, no matter what. And they understood God's teaching, even on dietary matters in the Old Testament. They understood that these were there for not only to obey God, but for our good as well. And they bargained. They bargained to say, give us, was it like 10 days? Let us eat our vegetables. And if at the end of this period of time, you judge for yourself whether we can continue. And of course, at the end of that time, they were visibly stronger, healthier looking than all the others who were eating the king's food. See, that's not a big crisis time. But that shows something about their heart, where they were, their orientation to be faithful to God in a hostile context, but when the stakes weren't so high, in the day-to-day choices they would make. I don't remember all of the sermons my dad ever preached that I sat under as a child. There were a lot of them. I remember a few of the things that he repeated over and over again, just like I assume that some of my children will remember Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, remember some of these things that I keep coming back to. But I remember one quote from when he went to college at Bob Jones University, and whether this was Bob Jones the founder or Bob Jones the second, but whoever was the president at the time and a frequent chapel speaker there, would often make this statement to the student body: do right. Do right. Even if it causes the stars to fall, do right. That's the challenge here. And it is connected with hope, isn't it? Because sometimes, even when you do right, wrong is done to you. Sometimes the lions devour you. Sometimes the flames devour you, that is your body. But we have a hope that goes beyond that. We have a hope that whatever God asks us to go through, He will walk with us through it. And after that, there are no words for the hope we have in what comes next. There is more to life than this life. And so we fix our hope, not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. We fix our hope, the person and promises of God. Risk hope, not only in trusting the faithfulness of God, but risk hope in walking a life of faithfulness to Him, no matter what.